easy to understand when you think a little bit about it, why it's very, very important that the U.S. have strategic partnerships with a bunch of different islands in the Pacific. And we have, as you mentioned, the Compacts of Free Association, where the U.S. has military bases, landing strips, can resupply those places in the event of a war. But they're still independent countries.
Mm-hmm.
But how much attention are they getting, and is it enough? And I guess that's a question for what we've seen over the last, decade or so, and now what we may or may not see under the Trump administration.
So there are three categories of Pacific Islands from this, if we're talking from this perspective. The first group are islands that are part of the United States. So the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, which consists of islands like Saipan or Tinian, where the U.S. is rebuilding the Northfield sites, which is where the B-29s took off from to bomb Tokyo. It's where the Enola Gay took off from. That is the point in the U.S. that is closest to China. It's about 1,600 miles from China, but it's U.S. And just south of that is Guam, which is obviously a very strategic location, and American Samoa, which is in the southern hemisphere. Well, but the important part of it is, if you're China and you're looking at Latin America, the islands become incredibly important because you want transshipment hubs, you want resupply routes, all that sort of stuff, and all of these territories. This is why I've been going back to the 19th century. American Samoas started to become part of the U.S. 125 years ago. And the logic for the U.S. was not grabbing places willy-nilly like Europe. It was, in fact, initially, what was happening in the Samoas was there was a contest between the British and the Germans, and the Samoan chiefs asked the Americans to, if they wanted to do a deal. And there was an equitable sort of sovereign state sort of deal between the Samoan chiefs and the United States. And they offered them the entire island, and the U.S. just took the port, the very good deep water port. And eventually that expanded into the islands that are of American Samoa. And the U.S. took it because they needed a place in that location. I mean, the geography hasn't changed. And similarly, if China is looking to have this highway between, you see what they're building up in Latin America, and you don't teleport to Latin America. You have to get across the Pacific. So you want reliable, secure way stations as you're going across the Pacific. And American Samoa is potentially in that zone. That becomes of heightened importance. So that first category of strategic relationship with Pacific Islands are places that the U.S. has already decided, usually over 100 years ago, that they're very important for U.S. security. They're part of the U.S. The second, and this was the mistake that McKinley made, which was by not taking the islands from Spain and Japan, and then Spain selling them to Japan, and then selling them to Germany, and then Japan took them in World War I. So in 1914, Japan took the German possessions, and that gave Japan control from 1914 until 1944, 30 years, over islands across the whole center of the Pacific.
Japan took the islands from Germany?
Yeah.
It's really beautiful that they could do that and then still work together later on.
Yeah. Well, things change. Yeah. Japan was on the Allied side in World War I.
History.
Yeah. And yeah, so it took an area that is now Palau, Federated States of Micronesia, Marshall Islands, and that's what allowed it. So the same way that I mentioned McKinley said, if the Spanish have the Philippines or the French have Hawaii. The west coast of the U.S. isn't safe. If you're looking from the Asian side, if you're Japan and the U.S. has Hawaii and the U.S. has Guam or whatever, you feel you're not safe, right? So Japan quietly militarized the whole center of the Pacific, and there was a legendary Marine, Pete Ellis, who in like early 1920s was snuck into Palau, where he subsequently maybe drunk himself to death, maybe was poisoned by the Japanese. He wrote this book about how we're going to end up fighting the Japanese and we're going to have to island hop. And, here are the islands and this is how we do it. So that whole middle of the zone, plus the Commonwealth, what's now the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, Saipan and Tinian, the Japanese took them and militarized them.
And just to jump forward a little bit, that's where China is now very actively trying to have an influence.
So McKinley's mistake was saying we've got the edges of the Pacific, we're fine, right? We've got Hawaii, we've got Guam and the Philippines, we got it under control. Meanwhile, the Japanese took the whole middle. World War II came along, and 100,000 Americans died fixing that mistake. Right, they had to go through and they couldn't get through those Japanese islands. So you had to come down through Guadalcanal and up through Tarawa and then fight your way across.
So you're saying the U.S. should have taken all those islands?
Well, I'll tell you how the U.S. decided to correct that from a strategic perspective, which gets to our. I'm still answering that question from yesterday, which is that. After World War II, those islands went to the UN and became the only UN Security Council strategic trust territory, and was given to the U.S. for administration. Jumping forward several decades, the U.S. set up a Congress of Micronesia. Representatives from all those islands came together in Saipan. The representatives from the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas voted to. And then it went to a plebiscite, voted to join the United States. So that's how Saipan, Tinian, all those became part of the United States. So they joined into that Guam first category of islands. Palau, Federated States of Micronesia, Marshall Islands, voted to go independent, but to sign this Compact of Free Association with the U.S., which gives the U.S. strategic denial. So they can say no other militaries operate here, and allows the U.S., if it wants, to operate from there militarily. But it also allows the people of those three countries to live and work freely in the U.S. They can study at U.S. universities at in-state rates. They get all sorts of federal government services. They get some federal government support. So they are independent countries, but the strategic concerns of the U.S. are satisfied, and the human development concerns of the people of the islands are hopefully satisfied.
Well, are they being satisfied? Is the U.S. doing enough to keep them satisfied?
So those negotiations that came up for renegotiation, the financial services part and government support comes up every 20 years for renegotiation, and that came up about 2 years ago, and it was. There were 4 bills that came up for funding, foreign funding, voting at around the same time: Taiwan, Israel, Ukraine, and the compacts. Mm-hmm. And the only one of the 4 that passed was the compacts. There's huge bilateral support for it.
Right. So they got, my understanding is a $7 billion contract over 20 years for aid and support.
Yeah, that's right. So it's about $7 billion for 3 countries for 20 years. I mean,
it's actually not that much money.
It's really not that much money, and a huge amount of that, like 600 or 700 million, is for the post office. They're considered domestic mail. That's how close the relationship is. You can order off Amazon if you live in those countries.
That's amazing, because you can't even do it if you live in Quebec.
No, you can't. No, and rightfully so. Yes. Yeah. Anyway, so I'll just finish it up. So that's that second category country, and that's that category that I think the thinking among some around the Trump world is Greenland could fall into.
Right.
And then there's the other independent countries of the Pacific. But the thinking, the original thinking that goes back to actually before McKinley was that for the U.S., that zone of the Pacific, that Central Pacific, not the Southern Pacific, is by far the most strategically important. And that's where the most effort has gone in.
This was just one clip from our hour-long podcast with Cleo. We covered a lot more, including answering some great viewer questions for her from our website subscribers. I invite you to join our community too, where you'll get your questions answered, monthly live streams, exclusive episodes, and tons more stuff. So go to ChinaUncensored.tv and become a member. I'll see you there.